Let's talk briefly about psychological gesture. And I say briefly because when I was taking classes, these classes would be a few hours long and sometimes 3, 4 hours. And that was because we had a lot of people. We would get up and do group exercises, and then the group would sit down, and then one at a time would come up and do exercises. And at the end of this, we would do prepared scenes or monologues for George. So to explain this way, it seems kind of brief, but here it is. Psychological gesture is a pose with every muscle in your body being involved in it, from your toes to the top of your head, your fingertips. I can't emphasize that enough. You need to build muscle memory. You can't just do this once and say, okay, that's the psychological gesture for this character that sums up this character. That's it, I've done it once. No, you may know it, but you don't feel it. It's not much different than, I could tell you that, hey, I got a piano 2 years ago, and I watched a video on YouTube on how to play it, and the next morning I figured, well, I know how to play it, and I watched a video, so I should be able to play with feeling. I'm still working on that 2 years later with a lot of practice. Playing it with feeling means I can forget about the knowledge of it and allow my muscle memory and my emotions to drive the music. I can do that some with a guitar. I'm not much of a musician, but after 45 years or so of playing guitar, I can do it a little bit. And acting is much more natural for me. And years of classes and working really helps. So what you need to do is, when you do a psychological gesture, it is the total sum, a summary of your character, and you take a pose that expresses what this character is all about. And this is their overall psychological gesture for that character. Now, if that's a very up and happy character, then imagine being very up and very happy about something and using your whole body, and then do a pose for it, and really get involved in that pose. And if this character is dark and sullen and whatever, then you want to get into that pose and really feel, and that's this character's through line, so to speak. Now, later on, we'll talk about psychological gestures for the overall psychological gesture, the psychological gesture that sums up this scene, this paragraph, this line. And that generally comes much later in Chekhov technique, when we start breaking down chapters and paragraphs and lines and how to transition from one psychological gesture to the next. So your overall happy character has a molding type body, and something happens in his or her life that takes them to another place, and you need to work on the psychological gesture for that character, containing that through line, but for that scene, for that line, for that moment, and then transition into something happy or something very angry. And this all requires muscle memory. You have to do it over and over and over again. People do this for hours just to get the feeling of it. But the beautiful part is, once you've done that, you can call them up really easy. It will always be there when you think about that moment, that scene, that line. And once you really feel the character in the body and that psychological gesture, start putting words to it. And that's another beautiful thing about Chekhov technique. You don't have to have a scene partner or be rehearsing for a specific role in anything, whether it's theater or film. You don't need that. You can work on your own to build your muscle memory and include all of these elements. So when you do have a particular script or scene or character to play, you can decide which one of those elements you want, and you will feel it. I promise you that. You'll feel it right now. You'll jump into that character and run away with it. And that's what you want to do. So that psychological gesture is just something you have to work on your own. The other thing I'd like to say is when you start, you're going to do some exercises for an hour or so at home. And you should always start by walking around the room, hopefully a room with a hard surface. And lightness and ease, I've touched upon it in the past, but it's really important to bring these things up again and again. So we started every class with, George would have us all get up and walk around the room, and then faster, and then faster, and then faster, and he doesn't want to hear you walk. So you really practice on keeping that up and light feeling. Lightness and ease is very important for character because, again, as I mentioned before in another video, the work must never show. It must appear effortless. And that's psychological gesture. And I'm going to move on from that because this gives you something to exercise. And watch for my next video. I'll be covering many topics over several videos to come. Join me on Patreon and let's see what's going on there. And I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.